The president has been briefed on this latest wave of gun violence. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre tweeted that the president has asked federal law enforcement to provide any necessary assistance to local authorities in San Mateo County. And this comes as the president prepares to host Democratic congressional leaders at the White House this afternoon. He will also host a reception for new members of Congress this evening. So for more on all of that, I want to bring in senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. You know, Ed, I'm sure the agenda issues have probably already been set, but in light of some of the recent shootings, I wonder if gun violence is likely to come up.
Well, it remains a top policy issue for Democrats no matter what. And this is a meeting today, his first one at least, of like-minded Democrats. So undoubtedly, it's going to be on the agenda. There are obviously other big issues that they have to worry about here in Washington in the coming weeks and months, most notably the impending showdown over raising the federal debt limit. And then trying to see what else Republicans may try to do as they control the House. But given the fact that Democrats have been fighting for stricter gun measures across the country at the federal and state levels, given that many of them represent parts of the country where there have been examples of this kind of violence, mass shootings, or just ongoing urban violence, it remains a big issue of concern. Last night, the president, for example, put his at least presidential support behind a series of bills that were reintroduced by Senators Dianne Feinstein and Richard Blumenthal, two leading Democratic gun control proponents. It would, if it were to be passed, renew the federal assault weapons ban and make some other changes in what kinds of weapons could be sold and distributed in this country. That's an ongoing push that the president's had ever since the first federal assault weapons ban was put in place in the mid-1990s. Right. But in today's Congress, it's got nowhere to go but to be introduced.
Let me actually, because you actually spoke to the governor of Illinois, Chicago is, J.B. Pritzker, yep, about gun legislation. I want to play some of that interview so people can hear it.
Sure.
Republicans talk an awful lot about mental health and say what we really need to do is not pass assault weapons bans, but really we need mental health treatment. But they voted against it every time in our state. And we've made significant strides in mental health treatment. So, they're hypocrites. They talk a lot about that, mainly because they don't want to talk about the fact that if you had an assault weapons ban in place, it really does reduce the number of shootings.
So, as you point out, the president has made moves in that direction, but, this is a confounding issue for every administration.
It is. And at the state level there in Illinois, Governor Pritzker just this month signed new legislation that actually starts to chip away at some access to semi-automatic weapons. It would ban certain elements that make certain weapons more automatic than they are right now. Switches is what they're called. Also expands the so-called red flag laws in Illinois, making it harder for people who are deemed dangerous by a judge to have access to firearms. But what he was saying in our interview, which airs a little more of it airs later today on Red and Blue, is that in Illinois they've passed this aggressive new bill, which is now being challenged by gun rights groups, but they've also done work on mental health legislation, which is something that Republicans usually push for in response to these kinds of incidents, because that is obviously a big concern as well. And he says, look, we've done both in this state. The problem is the Republicans vote against the gun-specific legislation while they may or may not support the mental health legislation. He says there's got to be a way to work together on all of these issues, and he at least says in Illinois they've tried to do that.
Yeah, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach. Listen, before I let you go, I have to sort of ask you a little bit about this continued drama about the confidential documents that have been popping up at properties connected with the president. We know that the search continues to see if there were any other documents anywhere. I'm wondering if this is impacting the support that the president is receiving, though, from other Democrats.
Well, we asked Governor Pritzker about it. He didn't really bring it up. But what we did notice over the weekend was some more senior members of the Democratic Party, senators who once served with, some of whom once served with Joe Biden in the Senate, being far more critical of his handling of this situation, saying that it's irresponsible for anybody to have this kind of access, and that the president, from a legal perspective, certainly now, is handling this appropriately, certainly compared to former President Trump. But the fact that it happened at all raises concerns with them about the mishandling of this information, not just by the current president, who's a former senator and vice president, but by anybody. And so that was notable. It came from Dick Durbin, from Tim Kaine, from Joe Manchin, who right there sort of speak to the diaspora of Democrats, at least in Washington, who the president works with. If you're hearing it from them, inevitably you may be hearing it from others. So far, though, no real signs of concern among Democrats. There was polling out over the weekend, though, that also showed that many Americans are concerned about this and don't think the president handled it well. If that persists, it becomes at least a short-term political problem for the president as he prepares for his re-election campaign.
Indeed. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much.